Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. What's up, everybody? I pray you had a great weekend, and I pray the week coming up is even greater. All right, let's get into this video. Let me warn you, you're not going to believe what you're about to hear. A woman is going to seriously claim that white men are the real victims today, and that they are at the bottom of the barrel, and that the founders of the country created a country of equality. But what I really want you to hear is this notion that white men are victims. White men are victims. Let's listen.
You know, the hardest person to be right now in America is white males, right? You're at the bottom of the food chain in the social justice world.
Yeah, for sure.
But we shouldn't discriminate against anybody. And what President Trump is saying is, you know, we should all treat each other with respect and love. We should have an equal playing field across. And some of these kind of woke progressive agendas is actually hurting America. It's dividing us. It's hurting our relationships in our communities. And let's go back to just seeing each other the way the founders decided we should see each other, as equal.
I find that to be laughable. I find it to be preposterous. It is a myth, and there is danger to what she said. Okay, you heard it for yourself. She's essentially saying that white men are the real victims. And then she added that the framers, the founders, created a country of equality, despite the fact that they put in the Constitution the 3/5 clause and the fugitive slave law, and they were enslavers. That is what I call white male victimhood. White male victimhood. The notion that white men are oppressed, they're silenced, they're being replaced. But here's the truth. White male victimhood is not real. It's a myth. It's not just a myth even. It's a strategic weapon. They have weaponized white male victimhood against blacks, and this has been going on for at least the last 150, 60 years. And they use it to attack black progress, civil rights, democracy itself. They especially use it when blacks make some sort of progress, right? When Obama, for example, was elected and then reelected, oh man, that really brought out the white male victimhood narrative. But again, it's a myth. And today I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove it with hard facts, real history, and some solid evidence. So let's get started. So where did this whole white male victimhood myth begin? Where and how did it begin? Well, after the Civil War, Reconstruction began, and we Black Americans gained citizenship rights, we gained voting rights, we gained political rights. We made some progress. And in response, deeply embittered white Southerners launched the first white victimhood narrative. And they began claiming that Reconstruction was punishing the South. They claimed that black people in office were creating chaos and disorder. And it was all a big lie. A lie designed to justify new systems of oppression, such as Jim Crow laws, Black Code laws, voter suppression, KKK terrorism, and much more. This response to Black progress during Reconstruction is a racist practice called white backlash. Yes, whenever Black Americans make any kind of gains, any kind of progress, white men will play the victim card to generate white rage and white backlash. We have seen it over and over and over again. The pattern started early with fake narratives like the lost cause myth that painted Confederates as noble victims who fought for the nobility of the South. I mean, they've used it to justify lynching thousands of Black Americans based primarily on the lie of protecting white womanhood. All right? Now let's fast forward to the glorious days of the Civil Rights Movement. Like Reconstruction, all over again, whites used the Civil Rights Movement to claim white male victimhood to again generate white backlash. And here's how that unfolded. So after Reconstruction ended, blacks lived under the tyranny of Jim Crow. Southern blacks were largely sharecroppers. And if you don't know what sharecropping is, it is when black folks live on the property of white people, work for those white people, and then they supposedly share the proceeds from that work. But of course, the black people got the short end of the stick. After they basically subtracted all of the expenses out of black folks' share, they were left with pretty much nothing. So it was really just another form of slavery. And white supremacist law enforcement imprisoned black folks for minor offenses during Jim Crow, and then assigned many of them to what they called chain gangs. I remember them very well growing up. White supremacist businesses, they relegated blacks to the back of the bus and segregated them to particular sides of the store. When I was growing up and went to the doctor's office, for example, we had to go to the black side, the colored side of the doctor's office. If we wanted to go and watch a movie, we had to sit at the top of the theater and the whites sat at the bottom. Banks and mortgage companies, they redlined black neighborhoods, making it impossible for blacks to buy or build houses or finance businesses to create wealth. All of this was the result of that white male victimhood narrative, that white backlash. And what's more, our schools were under the order of the separate but equal doctrine of the Plessy v. Ferguson case. I remember that as well. The first 3 years of my education was in a segregated black school, and we had very inferior facilities and books and so on. All of this, again, connected to the lie that white men were being victimized by the Civil Rights Movement. So despite the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, white men continued to completely dominate our existence, much like slavery. I'm not saying that there was not progress, obviously, from slavery up until the time that I was born and growing up. There were a lot of progress. There was a lot of progress, no question about it. But in many ways, especially economically, politically, socially, white men continue to dominate black life. But in the 50s and 60s, blacks got very fed up. People like A. Philip Randolph, Dr. King, obviously, Justice Thurgood Marshall, Howard Thurman, theologians like Benjamin Mays. Charles Hamilton Houston was an attorney and the mentor of Justice Thurgood Marshall. You had folks like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, my favorite female civil rights activists from that time, Rosa Parks, and many others. They got tired of being sick and tired, to borrow the phrase from Fannie Lou Hamer. Youth activists also were involved in the fight, right? People like John Lewis, Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, Huey Newton, and many others. And you also, of course, in the North, you had Malcolm X, Adam Clayton Powell, Shirley Chisholm, and many others. And this demand for full black equality basically launched what became the Civil Rights Movement. And it wasn't just happening here in America. Our African brothers were also simultaneously fighting for their independence from European colonialism and exploitation. Now, back here in America, we demanded basic human rights and dignity and economic justice. And the movement was very successful. It gained the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68, and more. White politicians responded with even more white male victimhood. I mean, they played that white male victimhood card again. And they said, for example, desegregation would destroy white communities. They said the Civil Rights Act attacked state rights. Okay? All of that was the result of the success of the civil rights movement. So whenever we have some progress, these folks will always go into victimhood mode. And right at about that time, in the 50s, 60s, right-wing media started framing black equality as white oppression. When affirmative action arrived, they said it was reverse discrimination. When the U.S. Supreme Court recognized diversity as a compelling reason for the affirmative action programs in 1978, I think it was, that's when they really pitched a fit and said again, white males were victims. Okay? It has always been about protecting white male dominance. And speaking of right-wing media has played a huge role propagating this white male victimhood. Again, it started back in the 50s, back with a man by the name of William Buckley Jr. I remember him growing up. Several decades later, there was Rush Limbaugh, and then came Fox News. And today, right-wing media is all over social media propagating that same white male victimhood narrative as you saw in the video. Now, they are pumping it into homes every day, white homes and anybody else who will listen. And they're saying things like liberals are silencing you, diversity is an attack on the white man, immigrants are replacing you, and so on. And then the white male victimhood, it climaxed, as I said earlier, especially when Barack Obama was elected and then reelected. In response, they created the Tea Party, which supposedly was about taxes. But at their rallies, at those Tea Party rallies, you didn't hear anything about taxes. You didn't see signs about taxes. What you saw were signs showing Obama as a witch doctor. You saw racist birther conspiracy signs all over the place. You heard the old lie that white men are victims repackaged over and over and over again, that the government and everything else was geared toward helping minorities, right? That is another iteration of white male victimhood. So by 2015, when Donald Trump hit the scene, all he had to do was just turn the Tea Party into MAGA, which is what he did. And how did he do it? By using white male victimhood. And he turned it into a national grievance movement. At rallies, he said stuff like, the real victims are white men who can't speak freely for themselves, who can't get jobs. They're losing their country. You see, this was the modern form of the same old white male victimhood myth. But folks, the data does not support this white male victimhood. The data, the facts, the evidence. Let's get real. White men continue to dominate this country, despite their cries of white male victimhood. Here's what the numbers show. Regarding wealth, white Americans control 85% of U.S. wealth, whereas black Americans have less than 5%. Hispanics have less than 4%. White men represent most of that wealth. They control most of American wealth. White men represent about 58% of all venture capital investors, and they manage the overwhelming majority of venture capital dollars. Whites make up about 67% of investment bankers. White men manage 97% of hedge fund assets. They constitute about 74% of Fortune 500 companies, the CEOs. White men hold about 60% of Fortune 500 board seats. So where's this victimhood stuff coming from? When white men hold the largest personal share of white wealth in this country. And the basis of that wealth came from stolen land and stolen labor. Yet they're the ones who claim to be the victims. When you look at the professional occupations, for example, like doctors and lawyers, white males are 36.6% of the physicians. Black Americans are less than 6% of the physicians in this country. When you talk about lawyers, white males are about 62% of all the lawyers in this country. Black Americans represent less than 6%. Now, what about six-figure jobs? Jobs that pay at least six figures. White men make up 40% of those jobs that pay over $100,000. White men, whereas Black Americans have less than 8% of those jobs. What about political power? Well, 71% of U.S. senators are white men. 82% of Congress overall is white, and the majority being white men. You see, this is a myth. When you talk about, for example, unemployment, white males, their unemployment rate stays around 3%. Black American unemployment is usually at least twice that. You see what I'm saying? White male victimhood is not a reality. It is a myth. But it's more than a myth. It is a strategic weapon. It is what undergirds MAGA. They've based their whole movement on this white male victimhood, despite the fact that white males are richer, they're more politically powerful, they're better educated, they're employed at higher rates, they're less likely to be in prison, they even live longer. So how are they the victims when they dominate wealth, jobs, education, politics, and everything else? They are not oppressed. They use that to justify oppressing others. White men are still the most advantaged and privileged group in America. And the myth that white men are victims is also extremely dangerous for blacks. It has and it does fuel voter suppression, civil rights rollbacks, attacks on black history, the banning of diversity programs, and of course we know the history of white nationalist violence. Just think about Charlottesville, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Charleston, South Carolina, and the many, many, many other acts of violence against black people. Now, take, for example, some MAGA supporters are using the tragic killing of Austin Metcalf to claim that black Americans target white people more than the other way around. That is a lie. That is a myth. That's false. Here's reality. When you look at the FBI's latest hate crime numbers from 2023, the group most targeted wasn't white Americans, it was black Americans. Out of nearly 6,000 reported hate crimes tied to race, over half of the victims were black. Over half. And when you stack that against other racial groups, the rate of anti-black hate crimes was more than 3 times higher than any other group. The numbers aren't even close. That is the danger of white male victimhood lies. You see, when the most powerful group in America lies about being the most oppressed, everyone is at risk, especially blacks. Especially blacks. So let me close this. When white males claim victimhood, it is not a cry for fairness, like you all need to treat us more fair. That's not what it is. It is a historic and strategic weapon to justify more black oppression. It is a strategy to protect white male hegemony. The facts are clear about this. The history is clear. And unfortunately, the danger is clear as well. How many times in history have we read where someone was some black person, falsely accused of something, and then whites would go out and lynch and burn the whole town down based on this victimhood narrative? And it's just time that we call it out. MAGA has built its movement on this false narrative. And if we don't call it out, they will keep using this fake pain to roll back civil rights, which we see them doing every day, just based on this lie about white male victimhood. So folks, stay alert, stay informed, and stay woke. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video.